Next, let's talk about auto properties versus private members. In many code reviews, I see classes a lot like this, where they have a number of members that all have some data they want to store for the class. In this case, this person has a first name, a last name, a birthday, and then an address that is another structure. And they very dutifully followed the Object-Oriented Programming 101 course that they took and said, we don't want to expose members directly out. We want to protect them with property getters and setters. And so we've created a private version of the data and then a getter and setter that allows us to set and get. Having access to the data inside of this person class is perfectly acceptable here, but we're not doing any interrogation of it. If this really is just some sort of entity that we need to store data in, we're not doing business logic or business rules. It's almost always simpler to use automatic properties. Now, in older code bases, this just wasn't possible because automatic properties came in later versions of .NET. So when you're looking at .NET 1.0, 1.1, you're going to see that this was really the only way to do it. But the same functionality for each of these properties is actually implemented in an auto property. So let's replace this with an auto property. This auto property says we're going to have a property called first name. It's going to have a getter and a setter, but we're going to tell the compiler to go ahead and build basically the private member for us. For a great many of the classes in your code, this is going to be plenty. And in the case where you need to actually change this in order to do some business rules or business logic in the getter or the setter, you can always refactor them because they're still methods. Doesn't mean you need to go to every class where you're doing this and refactor it back into automatic properties. That's not going to buy you a whole lot to do that refactoring. But when you're building new classes that just have simple needs for methods, using automatic properties is almost always the right thing to do. I'll go ahead and just change these quickly to auto properties. And in case you're not familiar with what I'm doing, there's a shortcut for creating properties called prop. If you type prop and then tap twice, it'll create the structure of it, allow you to set the type, even if it's not a native type like address. So we now have a class, the person class, which is just as simple implementation-wise as all that large amount of code we looked at a minute ago. So the functionality is exactly the same, but the amount of code we're dealing with is much, much simpler. Let's wrap up this module.